Hello again and welcome back to our course on PSE 15. In this and the next few sections we're going to look at saving and sharing. And as part of that we're also going to take a look at file formats, the different formats in which you can save both your images and the artifacts that you create with them, such as for example slideshow videos. The first thing to point out is that when it comes to sharing, you can share from either the editor or the organizer. However, if you look at the share menu in the editor, you have Facebook, Flickr, Twitter, whereas if I switch into the organizer, it's a much longer list, and it includes email, for example. One of the key factors to take into account when it comes to sharing is that there really are two general approaches to sharing. One of them is to specifically give or send something to one or more named people. The second approach is to publish something. You may still restrict who can see the something that you've published, but you're really more making it available rather than specifically sending it to people. What I'm going to do in this section is to explain some general aspects of saving and sharing. In the next section I'm going to talk about an example of that first sharing option, i.e. specifically sending something to another person, and in this case I'm going to choose sending by email. And then in the section after that I'm going to look at an example of how to make something available, and in fact I'm going to show you how to make something available via Facebook. In a subsequent section I'm going to talk about another very important aspect of sharing, and that is how to prepare material to publish on the web. So let's get started. First thing I want to talk about is the different file formats that are available to you. And as an example, let's start with the slideshow that we created right near the beginning of the course. It just had 3 images in it and some standard music. And I'm looking here at the media browser in the organizer at 2 files associated with that slideshow. The thumbnail on the right, let me just hover over the little icon, says slideshow project, and as you know that will be saved in a format of file called a PSE file. The PSE file format is used by Photoshop Elements for projects, and the information needed to, if you like, keep a project together is stored in a PSE file. What you would not do is to provide a PSE file to somebody who doesn't use Photoshop Elements. If you wanted somebody to watch this slideshow, you wouldn't send them the PSE file, because unless they had Photoshop Elements themselves and knew how to use it, they wouldn't be able to do anything at all with it. It's not, if you like, a general user file format. From the PSE file you would make probably an MP4 file, and the file on the left there, let me just hover over its icon, is the video, which is an MP4 format file. That's a standard video format. And if you want to share a video with somebody, you'd send them a format like MP4 format. You wouldn't send them the project PSE from which it was made. Now let's look at some of the images that we worked on earlier on in the course. Let's go back to the rafting image with the word Tongariro on it, that one. If I look at the information in the panel on the right, I can see that that is a PSD format file. And as I've mentioned quite a few times on the course, PSD format is very important because it enables us, amongst other things, to store image layers. And in order to do many of the things we do in PSE, we need to use layers. If you wanted to share that image with somebody, you would not normally provide them with the PSD format file, because again, unless they had Photoshop or a Photoshop related product themselves, such as Photoshop Elements, they wouldn't be able to do anything with a PSD format file. What you would provide them with is a format that they could do something with, such as JPEG. That may appear to create a problem because you may say, well, if I've used layers in an image and I can't give somebody a PSD file because they won't be able to do anything with it, am I not stuck? Well, you're not, because what happens is you don't give the person the PSD file, you save the PSD file in a suitable format, such as JPEG. And if you look immediately above that to the flower that we worked on again earlier on in the course, that flower at some stage had many layers in the image, but it's been saved in JPEG format. And in fact, many of the things that you can do in PSE, you can do without ever going into PSD format. But if you do go into PSD format and you subsequently want to save an image to share with somebody, you would normally convert it to one of the standard formats, which in this case would very often be JPEG format. So it's very important to know which formats to use to share the various types of image, artifact, etc. that you use and make with PSE. And one other point to make, particularly in relation to PSD format files, if you work on an image in PSD format so that you can use layers and so on, if you subsequently convert it to JPEG, you don't lose the information that you've got in the separate layers. The information is combined back into what might loosely be called a single layer again. However, once you've done that, you wouldn't then be able to work on the separate layers. The information, though, would still all be there, and in terms of sharing that image with somebody who wasn't going to use PSD format, everything you need them to see, they'd be able to see. If you're not particularly familiar with various types of file format, at this point you may be wondering which ones you should use. There's actually very useful information in the Photoshop Elements reference PDF about file formats. For instance, there's a section here on file formats for saving images. It mentions the main image formats. This is for still images, BMP, CompuServe GIF, JPEG, and so on, and explains the pluses and minuses of each of those. That may still be quite confusing, but in 3 sections from now I'm going to talk about saving for the web and the sort of factors that will come into you choosing which format to save in. In terms of saving images for things like going into photo books and just sharing as email attachments, which we're going to look at in the next section, JPEG is a very commonly used format, but you'll also see PNG format and TIFF format. I'll talk about those a little bit as well. So do make sure that you look at various references to file formats in the PDF files. They'll give you more background information about these different formats, and as I say, I'll be talking about them more as we go through the rest of the course. The last point I'd like to make in this section is that one of the other most adaptable formats for the artifacts that you produce is of course PDF format. And when you produce a document as opposed to a video or a single image in PSE, PDF format is a very good format to go for, because nowadays PDF format is probably the most commonly readable format for people who are accessing documents on computers. So that's it for this section. In the next one, let's start looking at sharing, and we're going to start with sharing using email. I'll see you in the next section.